It started like any other quiet morning for me, a retired grandmother who liked simple things, hot tea, a slow walk, and a short call from my daughter. I still believed she loved me. I still believed my son-in-law was just loud, not dangerous. I did not know they were planning a weekend cabin trip that was never meant to end with me coming home. They thought my money would fix every problem in their lives. They forgot who earned it. If you're watching this, please like the video, subscribe, and tell me from where are you watching right now. My life before that weekend looked quiet from the outside, almost plain. I woke up every morning at the same time, 6 a.m. sharp. My bones were stiff, but my mind felt steady. I made my tea, sat by the kitchen window, and watched the birds fight over crumbs I left out for them. I tended to my small backyard garden, trimming the herbs and pulling out weeds one by one. Every day followed the same slow rhythm. I told myself I enjoyed the peace. I told myself I had earned it. I told myself things were fine because I had survived harder years. My daughter visited sometimes, always in a hurry, always on her phone. She showed up with a quick hug, a short smile, a distracted mind. But I never complained. I thought that was just life now. Kids grow up. They get busy. They forget how much space you once filled in their world. There were no loud problems, no fights, no warnings, nothing that said danger was coming. In my heart, I still believed I had a daughter who cared, even if she cared in small, distant ways. My son-in-law was louder, pushier, always making remarks about money, work, luck, and missed opportunities. But I ignored most of it. I told myself he was frustrated with life, not with me. I didn't want to think badly of them. I didn't want to see what was right in front of me. So when they suggested a weekend trip to a quiet cabin for bonding, I said yes. I thought maybe it would help us reconnect. Maybe we could sit around a fire and talk. Maybe they wanted time with me. My daughter smiled when she invited me, but even now I remember something about her smile feeling too tight, like someone forcing themselves to look warm. I ignored it. I wanted to believe she was trying. We drove up the mountain road together, the three of us, and everything felt normal enough. My daughter talked about how stressed she was, how tired she felt, how life was unfair. My son-in-law joked too much, laughed too loudly, kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror. I tried to brush away the discomfort. I told myself I was imagining things because older women sometimes do that. You feel something is wrong, but you don't want to sound dramatic. When we reached the cabin, the air smelled like pine and old wood. My son-in-law opened the door with a wide smile, almost exaggerated, as if he was performing in front of an audience no one else could see. My daughter stood next to him, holding my hand, squeezing it as if she cared deeply. But her eyes didn't match the gesture. They were too calm, too watchful, too focused on my reactions. I should have noticed. I should have paid attention. But love makes you blind in the strangest ways. You want to believe the best of the people you raised. You want to assume kindness, not danger. Inside, they acted sweeter than they had in years. They insisted I sit down. They asked if I was comfortable. They poured my tea for me, something my daughter hadn't done since she was a teen. They brought out snacks, blankets, even slippers they claimed they bought just for me. It felt staged. It felt heavy. But I sat there and forced myself to relax. I wanted to believe this was a rare chance to reconnect. My daughter talked about family memories and cherishing time together. My son-in-law kept the fire going, even though the cabin was already warm. He fed the flames like he enjoyed watching them grow. Every now and then, he glanced at my daughter, and they exchanged quick looks, quiet signals, little nods they thought I didn't notice. I sat there pretending nothing was wrong, but inside, a cold feeling crawled through my chest. Still, I held on to hope. Hope that this trip was a gesture of love. Hope that maybe they wanted to spend time with me after months of distance. Hope that the warmth I saw was real. But older women don't stay blind for long. We feel things others ignore. We hear what people don't say out loud, and something about their forced sweetness felt off, like they were reading from a script. I didn't know it yet, but that weekend wasn't planned for bonding. It was planned for ending. They weren't bringing me to a peaceful getaway. They were bringing me to the place where they thought my life would stop and their fortune would begin. I thought I was going on a quiet weekend trip with my family. I didn't know I was walking straight into the middle of a plan. Their plan to get rid of me. And the worst part? I trusted them completely. When we stepped inside the cabin, the air felt too warm, too heavy, almost staged. It didn't smell like a place prepared for a relaxing weekend. It smelled like fresh gasoline near the fireplace, something sharp, something wrong. But my daughter walked around acting cheerful, pretending everything was normal, complimenting the cozy atmosphere as if she was reading from a script. She guided me to a chair near the fire, insisting I sit. Her smile stretched so wide it almost looked painful. My son-in-law took charge of everything else, closing windows, checking locks, adjusting curtains, moving around with a level of energy that didn't match the occasion. They looked like hosts preparing for a celebration. Except the celebration wasn't for me. It was for what they thought was about to happen. My daughter poured me tea, using both hands and acting overly careful, trying to seem thoughtful and gentle. She placed the cup in front of me with a sweetness she hadn't shown in years. But her eyes kept darting to her husband, almost asking for approval. He gave a tight nod, barely noticeable, but I saw it. They both kept exchanging those small glances, those quiet signals they thought an older woman wouldn't catch. They underestimated who I was. They always had. They thought my age made me blind. It only made me sharper. My son-in-law sat across from me on the couch, leaned back, and folded his hands like he was settling in for a show. He asked about my health, my sleep, my medications, questions he never cared about before. He looked too interested, too ready. He watched every expression on my face as if he needed confirmation that I was relaxed and unsuspecting. My daughter mirrored him, asking soft questions about my childhood, my favorite memories, my last wishes. Her tone sounded soft, but her eyes didn't match the words. Her smile didn't match either. It looked like she was trying too hard. Nothing about their behavior felt natural. My daughter held my hand and squeezed it too long. My son-in-law suddenly called me Mom, a name he had never used sincerely in his life. They brought out blankets, made sure I was warm, hovered around like anxious hosts trying to keep someone still. It was as if they wanted to emotionally soften me before something harsh happened. And the fire, they kept adding wood, piece after piece. The flames roared higher and louder than necessary. The heat filled the small cabin until sweat gathered at the back of my neck. But they didn't let the fire die down. If anything, my son-in-law looked excited each time the flames rose. He poked at the wood again and again with a kind of nervous enjoyment, glancing toward me to see if I noticed. My daughter stayed beside me, stroking my arm, telling me to relax, telling me I looked tired, telling me to close my eyes and rest. Her voice sounded warm, but her eyes kept flicking toward the door, the windows, the fire. She watched the room, not me. She watched her husband, not me. She watched the plan, not the person. I should have gotten up. I should have walked out. But parents always want to believe their children would never hurt them. So I sat there, trying to believe the warmth in her voice, trying to ignore the coldness in her smile. Then it happened. The first real crack in the performance. My daughter leaned in close, too close, moving my hair away from my forehead like she used to when I was sick. She whispered that she was so happy I came, but her voice trembled, not from love, from nerves. Right after that, she stood up quickly and joined her husband near the kitchen. They whispered to each other, thinking I couldn't hear, and that's when I finally noticed the silence around their smiles. No laughter, no real warmth, just tension, tightness, preparedness. They weren't hosting a peaceful trip. They were waiting for the moment they would move from pretending to doing. My daughter came back to sit beside me, her hand again trying to squeeze affection into my fingers. But her eyes were cold, empty, detached. And in that moment, I felt something inside me twist sharply, not from fear, but from heartbreak, because I finally understood something I had been trying not to see. She didn't bring me here to spend time with me. She brought me here to leave me behind. She held my hand so warmly, right before she tried to burn me alive. The shift happened in a single second. One small slip, one careless moment that revealed everything they had been hiding. Up until then, I had only felt discomfort, suspicion, and a strange tightness in the air. But nothing concrete, nothing that proved danger was truly sitting in that cabin with me. And then my son-in-law made the mistake that changed everything. The kind of mistake people make when they think the plan is already secure, when they believe their victim is too old, too trusting, too blind to notice what is right in front of them. It happened when he bent down near the fireplace, feeding the flames again, even though the fire was burning hot enough to make the room feel like a furnace. He crouched there, poked the logs, watched the fire grow taller. He looked almost satisfied, as if the flames were something he had been waiting for. My daughter stood behind him, arms crossed, her face tight and unreadable. They both thought I wasn't paying attention, that I was lost in the warmth, sipping my tea, adjusting my sweater like a harmless grandmother unaware of danger. Then he said it. He didn't whisper to me. He didn't whisper to my daughter. He whispered to himself, but loud enough that I caught it. Once the fire clears, the inheritance kicks in immediately. He froze the moment the words left his mouth. It was the wrong tone, the wrong timing, the wrong sentence for a casual cabin trip. His shoulders stiffened. His hand stopped moving. He didn't turn around right away. He knew what he had done. He knew that sentence did not sound like something innocent. He knew it wasn't meant for my ears. My daughter's head snapped toward him, eyes wide for half a second before she quickly masked it with a forced smile. She tried to play it off with a nervous laugh, mumbling something about him, always saying weird things. But it was too late. The mask she wore, the sweet daughter, the caring host, the loving child, cracked right down the middle. Her smile slipped, her eyes hardened, and for the first time, I saw the truth hiding under her rehearsed kindness. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It wasn't just instinct. It wasn't just uneasiness. It was confirmation. He had exposed something both of them were trying to hide, and the silence that followed was louder than any scream. I looked at both of them carefully, watching how they reacted. My son-in-law glanced toward the window, then the door, then the fire, like he was calculating something. My daughter swallowed hard, her face flushing, not with embarrassment, but with anger. Anger that he had spoken out of turn. Anger that he had revealed a piece of the plan before they were ready. She walked to the kitchen slowly, pretending to tidy up, but I saw her hands trembling. I saw the way she couldn't meet my eyes. My son-in-law kept tending the fire, but his movements were different now. Sharper, quicker, more irritated. He threw another log onto the flames with too much force. Sparks flew up, lighting the room for a brief moment, and in that flash I caught the look on his face. It wasn't frustration. It was fear. Not fear of what they were planning to do. He was certain about that. Fear that I now knew something I wasn't supposed to know. I set my teacup down on the small wooden table, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't try to hide my expression. I didn't pretend to be clueless. I didn't soften the moment with politeness. I simply looked at them, long, steady, and with the kind of clarity that only comes to older women who have lived enough life to recognize danger in any form. The room felt different after that. Not warm, not cozy, not peaceful, tight, staged, hostile. My daughter tried to recover her role, returning to my side with another forced smile, telling me I looked tired, offering to help me to the bedroom to rest before dinner. But her voice was too soft, too shaky. She wasn't comforting me. She was trying to move me exactly where she needed me. My son-in-law avoided my gaze completely. He focused on the fire, his back turned to me, but his body was stiff. I could tell he wanted to say something to my daughter, but he didn't dare speak again, not after what had slipped out of his mouth. I didn't respond to their false kindness. I just watched them. And the more I watched, the more their performance fell apart. Tension built between them, their whispers grew sharper, their eyes darted around like trapped animals. In that single sentence, one careless moment, he revealed everything they had been planning for months. He exposed their entire scheme. He exposed their desperation. He exposed their expectation of my death. My heart didn't break. It hardened. Because in that moment, I finally understood the truth. They weren't here to spend time with me. They weren't here to make memories. They weren't here for love. They were here for what they thought would be left of me. And now I knew. People always assumed I lived a simple life because I looked simple. Small house, old car, cheap shoes, and a garden I tended myself. No one ever asked what was behind that quiet life. Not my daughter, not my son-in-law, not even my closest relatives. And for years, I liked it that way. I never felt the need to explain my finances to anyone, especially because money changes people. It doesn't matter if you raised them, loved them, fed them, cared for them. Money reveals who they truly are. I learned that lesson early in life, and I never forgot it. Decades ago, long before my daughter was grown, I built something big, bigger than any of them could imagine. It didn't start with luck. It started with long nights, steady grit, and opportunities no one else in my family believed I could handle. The truth was, I wasn't some sweet, fragile woman who worked a small job and retired with pennies. I had built, invested, and protected more money than most people would ever see in their lifetimes. And I did it quietly, because the moment people smell wealth, they stop seeing you and start seeing what they can take. It began with a small tech startup I invested in back when people still used flip phones. Everyone said the idea was ridiculous. My own family laughed when I spent a small inheritance helping a young engineer who believed he could change the world. They teased me for years. They forgot about it almost immediately. But that investment grew into patents that companies still pay for today. After that, I put the money into foreign markets, steady, predictable investments in countries most Americans couldn't point to on a map. Then I bought real estate, not the flashy kind, but land, acres of raw land that multiplied in value while I acted like I was just tending to my tomatoes. I built wealth the same way I built my life, slowly, quietly, and with both feet on the ground. By the time my daughter married that man, my net worth wasn't thousands. It wasn't millions. It was billions. $5 billion, kept under trusts, corporate shields, and investment groups that didn't carry my name publicly. I never bragged. I never flaunted anything. I never even upgraded my lifestyle. I wanted peace, not attention. I wanted to live without people calculating what they could take from me. And that was why I never told my daughter, not because I didn't love her, but because she never learned how to handle even a small amount of money responsibly. Her entire life was a cycle of wanting more. More clothes, more cars, more status, more everything. And every time life didn't give her what she wanted, she blamed everyone but herself. My son-in-law was no better. He saw every wealthy person as someone who got lucky, and every poor decision he made as someone else's fault. Together, they were a storm, hungry, entitled, impatient. So I kept my wealth hidden. I lived modestly so my daughter wouldn't depend on it. I wanted her to build her own life, her own home, her own strength. I wanted her to stand on her own feet. And for a while, I thought maybe she would. But somewhere along the way, she began to resent me, not for what I had, but for what she assumed I didn't give. She thought I had a small pension. She thought I owned nothing but my little home. She thought the most I could leave behind was a life insurance policy and a few savings. She had no idea that I had enough money to buy the entire forest around that cabin 10 times over. She had no idea that while she and her husband gossiped about rich families, they were sitting across from a woman who could purchase their entire town and not feel a dent in her account. And that ignorance was exactly why they felt bold enough to hurt me. They believed my death would bring them a few $100,000, life insurance, property sale, whatever scraps they imagined. They believed burning that cabin with me inside would solve their problems. They believed taking my life would give them a fresh start. But they didn't know the truth. The real inheritance, the real fortune, was locked behind legal structures they had no access to. No fire would release it. No accident would trigger it. No death certificate would magically hand them billions. I had built my empire carefully, intentionally, and safely, and I left nothing in unsecured documents. They could burn every cabin in the state, and they still wouldn't touch a cent of my wealth. Their ignorance gave them courage. Their greed gave them cruelty. Their assumptions gave them the confidence to plan my death. But the truth? The truth was my shield. They thought I was a poor grandmother. They didn't realize I was the woman signing the checks that funded companies they worshipped. They didn't know I was the one holding the kind of power they only dreamed of. And soon, they would learn the difference between a woman who hides her wealth and a woman who protects it. Things didn't fall apart all at once. It happened slowly, one question at a time, one strange moment layered quietly over another. At first, I didn't see anything wrong. Older women like me, we want to believe our children care. We want to believe they're checking on us out of love, not curiosity. But then the questions started piling up, and each one felt sharper than the last. It began with small things. My daughter suddenly asked where I kept my medical files. She said she just wanted to help organize. She never cared about paperwork before. Then she asked about my medications, what I took, when I took it, what dosage. She even asked if I ever missed a pill. Her tone wasn't soft. It was calculating. She may have been smiling, but her eyes looked like someone taking inventory, not someone expressing concern. A few days later, she brought up my will, out of nowhere. She asked if I had one, if it was updated, who I named, where it was stored. She tried to sound casual, but her voice kept tightening on certain words. Beneficiaries, assets, property value. I told her the will was sorted and private. She didn't like that answer. She pressed harder, pretending she just wanted peace of mind. But peace was the last thing she was after. Then my son-in-law started getting involved. He wasn't subtle. He treated me like a business meeting. One afternoon, he came by with coffee and acted overly friendly. Too friendly. He sat across from me and casually slipped questions into the conversation about old finances, retirement accounts, and who handles your money when you're gone. When I didn't answer the way he wanted, he laughed it off, but his eyes didn't laugh with him. They narrowed, calculating, irritated, hungry. He began showing up more often. He checked the mailbox before I could reach it. He commented on bank envelopes. He mentioned seeing me as a safety net for their future, words coated in charm but dripping with expectation. My suspicion grew, a slow coldness spreading through my chest, but I pushed it down. Parents always push it down. We don't want to see our children as threats. But then something happened that I couldn't ignore. One evening, I walked into my daughter's house earlier than expected and found my son-in-law sitting at his computer with my name typed into a search engine, public records, property value sites, inheritance laws. He jumped when he saw me standing behind him, shutting the laptop so fast the sound echoed through the room. He muttered something about checking something for school, even though he wasn't in school. The lie was sloppy. His face was red. and my daughter appeared seconds later, flustered, her eyes darting between us like she had been listening from the hallway. From that day on, the two of them started acting as if time was running out, rushing questions, dropping hints, watching me with unsettling interest. They tried to hide it, but not well enough. They forgot that older women notice everything, especially the small things people think they're hiding. Their kindness became suffocating. Their questions became invasive. Their smiles became tense and thin. My daughter asked for my phone password one day in case of an emergency. She asked for the code to my home alarm. She asked where I kept my important folders. She asked who handled my accounts. All questions she had never cared about before. My son-in-law wasn't subtle at all. He asked what would happen to my house if I passed unexpectedly. He joked about me living forever, but each joke was followed by a quiet stare. He asked about life insurance policies I never told them about. He asked if everything was up to date. When I said it was none of his business, he grinned like someone who believed he already knew the answers. It wasn't love. It wasn't care. It wasn't concern. It was research. Pure, cold research. Behind my back, my daughter contacted a lawyer, the same lawyer who handled inheritance disputes in the region. She didn't know he was a close friend of mine. He warned me immediately, saying she was asking about what happens when elderly parents die in accidents. That word, accidents, sent a chill down my spine so deep I had to sit down. That was the turning point. That was when I could no longer pretend everything was fine. That was when I understood. Their sudden gentleness wasn't affection. It was preparation. They weren't planning to wait for nature to take its course. They were calculating a timeline, and every question they asked brought them one step closer to whatever dark idea they were building in their minds. Everything inside me tightened as I realized the truth. They weren't treating me like family anymore. They were treating me like a target. The breaking point didn't come from my son-in-law. It came from my daughter, the one person in this world I never thought would turn against me. I always believed that no matter how selfish people become, no matter how lost they get, a child still carries some piece of their mother in them, some warmth, some memory of being held, fed, protected. But the woman standing in front of me that day wasn't my daughter. She wasn't the girl I raised. She wasn't the child I read bedtime stories to. She was someone hard, cold, and angry at me for reasons she invented to justify what she wanted to take. It happened 2 weeks before the cabin trip. I went over to her house unannounced, something I rarely did. I brought soup, thinking she had sounded tired on the phone. When I walked in, the air felt tense, thick with something unspoken. She was pacing the living room, her eyes red from crying or maybe from frustration. My son-in-law wasn't home, but his presence hung in the air like smoke. She didn't greet me with a hug. She didn't even pretend to smile. She looked at me like I was the source of every disappointment in her life. I set the soup down and tried to ask what was wrong. She didn't answer. She just stared at me for a long moment, her chest rising and falling like she was holding back a storm. Then the storm hit. She exploded, not physically, but emotionally. She yelled that life wasn't fair, that she and her husband worked so hard but still had nothing, that other families helped their children more, that parents were supposed to do everything they could. She said I had left her to struggle for years while I lived comfortably. She accused me of being selfish, secretive, distant. Her voice shook with resentment that had clearly been building for a long time. I tried to calm her, but she wasn't listening. She paced, her hands shaking, her words getting harsher. She said if I truly loved her, I would share what I had. She said I owed her more, that I had taken the easy life while she suffered. She said she deserved better. She said her children deserved better. She said she deserved better. Then she finally snapped. She pointed her finger at me with a look so sharp it almost cut. "You owe us! You hid everything! You left us in the dark while you lived like some quiet queen. You should have helped us. We deserve a better life because of you." Her face was twisted with bitterness, not sadness, not fear, bitterness, like she believed she was entitled to everything I ever worked for, like the only thing standing between her and the life she wanted was me. I whispered the only truth I had left. "You were supposed to build your own." The moment I said it, she stared at me with hatred, real hatred, a kind I had never seen in her eyes before. It pierced me deeper than any knife, any betrayal, any injury, because it wasn't about money anymore. It was about blame. She blamed me for her choices, her failures, her debts, her unhappiness. She blamed me because it was easier than looking at her life honestly. Seeing my daughter look at me like that shattered something inside me. I didn't cry. I didn't yell back. I just stood there in silence as she ranted, pacing like a person who had run out of excuses and needed a villain. And in her mind, I was perfect. She shouted that I should stop hoarding my savings. She accused me of betraying her. She asked why I didn't care enough to help. She claimed she deserved everything I had worked for because she was my child. Every word stabbed deeper. Finally, she said the sentence that told me I no longer existed to her as a mother. "If you won't give it to us, we have to take what's ours. You're old. You had your life. It's time you hand it over." Those words, those cold, rehearsed words, they were the final piece of the truth. She wasn't confused. She wasn't emotional. She wasn't overwhelmed. She had spoken to someone who had convinced her it was justified, someone who filled her head with entitlement, her husband. And together, they had made a decision. My life was worth less than the money they wanted. She didn't hug me goodbye. She didn't apologize. She didn't soften. She turned away. And that was the moment I stopped seeing her as my little girl and started seeing her as someone dangerous. Seeing hatred in my daughter's eyes hurt more than the flames ever could. After that confrontation with my daughter, I went home and sat alone in my living room for hours, not crying, not shaking, just thinking. Something in me shifted that day. I realized I could no longer rely on love, memory, or motherhood to keep me safe. I had to rely on facts, proof, and strategy. Older women learn something young people never understand. Once you see someone's true intention, you can't go back to innocence. You can't unsee danger. You can't unhear threats. And I had heard enough to know that whatever they were planning was not just emotional manipulation. It was financial, calculated, and dangerous. So instead of waiting for their next move, I made mine. The first person I called was my lawyer, the one I've trusted for over 20 years. Not a family lawyer, not a casual lawyer, a serious one who has handled my business life, my trusts, my investments, my land deals, and every major decision I've ever made. When he picked up, he immediately heard something in my voice. I told him everything, not dramatically, just straight facts. He listened with the kind of silence that told me he understood exactly how serious this was. When I mentioned that my daughter and son-in-law were asking about my will, my assets, my passwords, and my health just in case, he didn't brush it off. He didn't laugh. He said the words that made my heart drop into my stomach. "It sounds like they're preparing for something they shouldn't be preparing for." Then he told me to let him dig. He said he would do a full background check on both of them: finances, legal filings, credit history, public records, business registrations, everything. I agreed. I wasn't scared anymore. I wanted the truth. I needed the truth. Because the sweet daughter I once raised was gone, and the man she married was steering their life towards something dark. The results came back 3 days later, and every line he read to me felt heavier than the last. My daughter and her husband were drowning in debt. Not small debt, massive debt, credit cards maxed out, loans unpaid, a business he started that was actually shutting down, bankruptcy filings they tried to hide. They were months behind on their mortgage. Their car payment was overdue. They had drained their savings, drained their retirement accounts, and taken out lines of credit with interest rates so high it made my head spin. They weren't just struggling, they were collapsing. And then came the worst part, the part that changed everything. My lawyer found conversations, emails, documents, inquiries, showing that my son-in-law had contacted an insurance agent months earlier, asking questions about accidental death coverage for elderly relatives. He wasn't subtle about it either. He asked how soon money would be released after a fire. He asked if an accidental house fire counted for immediate payout. He asked how investigations worked, who received the funds, how fast the process moved. My daughter appeared in some of those communications too, quietly, from her personal email, asking what counts as natural death in home incidents and whether a family cabin accident would delay payment. It wasn't grief, it wasn't worry, it wasn't planning, it was preparation. They weren't just fantasizing about having my money, they were structuring a plan around my death, step by step, question by question. They wanted the cabin fire to look like an accident. They wanted insurance money released quickly. They wanted no delays. They wanted no suspicions. They wanted everything clean, simple, fast. They wanted me gone so they could start over with my fortune. My lawyer didn't sugarcoat it. He said, "This isn't miscommunication. This isn't misunderstanding. This is intent." That single sentence snapped something final inside me. I had spent years excusing their behavior. I had ignored signs. I had softened blows. I had convinced myself it was just stress, frustration, or a young couple struggling with life. But now I had proof, cold, hard proof, that they were planning something far worse than emotional manipulation. They were planning my disappearance. So I gathered everything. I saved every email, printed every document, recorded every suspicious conversation. I set up fireproof cameras in my home. I placed trackers on my important papers. I alerted the bank. I alerted the family trust. I alerted the head of my corporate team. I built a wall of protection around myself so high that nothing they tried could get through it. I wasn't the fragile grandmother they thought I was. I had survived life long enough to know how to protect myself, and deep down, a single truth settled into my bones like steel. If they wanted war, they should have checked who I really was before lighting the match. When the fire finally happened, the moment they thought would end my life, I didn't panic the way they imagined. They had chosen an old cabin, one with dry wood and a fireplace that hadn't been maintained in years. They thought they understood every exit, every weakness, every escape, but they didn't know that I had visited that cabin with my husband decades ago and helped repair the back wall myself. I knew every inch of that place. I knew about the warped board behind the bed that popped loose if you pushed the right way. I knew about the old service door hidden behind the stacked firewood. My son-in-law locked the front door with a proud grin, whispering, "Hope you like fire," like a man who believed he had already won. My daughter smiled at me with a coldness I still feel in my bones. They thought the flames would finish their work for them. But the more people plan evil, the more they forget the simple truth. Life has a way of turning on the wicked. I slipped through the old exit, crawled under the back deck, and ran barefoot through the trees. Yes, the smoke hurt. Yes, the heat burned. Yes, I coughed until my ribs felt bruised. But I was alive, I was free, and I knew exactly where to go. A neighbor who lived half a mile down the trail owned an ATV and still owed me a favor from years ago. I reached his place, gasping, covered in soot, and he didn't ask questions. He just put me on the ATV and drove me straight down the mountain. By the time we reached the main road, police and my lawyer were already on alert. They knew something was wrong. They were waiting for my call. While I was escaping through the darkness, my daughter and son-in-law were driving home laughing, celebrating early freedom, toasting to a future built on ashes they thought were mine. They walked into their house expecting silence, expecting their living room to feel like victory. Instead, they walked into a room filled with police officers, my lawyer, and me, sitting calmly on their couch, soot wiped off, hair pulled back, documents neatly stacked on their coffee table. The look on their faces is something I will never forget. My daughter froze in the doorway, keys slipping from her hand. My son-in-law's mouth fell open, his confidence draining out of him like someone pulled a plug at his feet. Their faces went sheet white, not because they were sorry, not because they realized they almost killed me, but because their plan had failed, because the person they needed gone was sitting right there, breathing and watching them choke on their own shock. My lawyer stood up first. He pressed play on the fireproof camera footage, small hidden devices I had placed weeks earlier after learning of their plan. Footage of them locking the cabin door. Footage of them disabling the smoke detector. Footage of my son-in-law laughing as he poured accelerant near the woodpile. Footage of my daughter whispering, "We just need her gone." The police officers watched silently. My daughter cried instantly, loud and dramatic, but her tears didn't match the coldness she had shown only hours earlier. My son-in-law tried to talk, fast, desperate, stumbling over excuses, but the officers shut him down. Everything was documented. Every question they had asked about insurance, every email they had sent to the inheritance lawyer, every bank statement showing their crushing debt, every message they exchanged planning how to claim money after my accidental death. The evidence was stacked high enough to drown them, but I didn't speak until the room was completely silent. I put my hand on the folder, a folder holding everything I had collected over months, and slid a single sheet of paper toward them across the coffee table. A contract, a simple one. They could take $5 million, enough to restart their lives, pay off debts, disappear somewhere far, and in exchange, they would sign away every legal connection to me. Forever. No inheritance, no lawsuits, no future claims. They would cut themselves out of my life in writing. If they refused, the police would continue the charges and the investigation would go federal. It was their choice. My daughter stared at the paper, torn between greed and fear. But my son-in-law didn't hesitate. He grabbed the pen immediately, his true nature exposed in seconds. He didn't care about family. He didn't care about loyalty. He cared about money. Always money. He signed his name with trembling hands. My daughter hesitated for a long moment, tears streaming, emotions spinning, but in the end, she signed too. Not because she loved me, not because she regretted anything, because she chose money over her mother's life. She revealed herself completely in that moment. And that was when I understood something important. They didn't expose themselves. They revealed themselves. Everything they did in that living room, fear, desperation, greed, showed me exactly who they were. Not my family, not my support, not my future. Just two people who believed money replaced blood. The contract was signed. The officers stepped back. My lawyer closed the folder, and I stood up with one truth solid inside my chest. The danger was no longer mine to carry. After they signed the contract, a heaviness settled over the room, thick, uncomfortable, suffocating. My daughter sat slumped in her chair, her tears drying in streaks down her cheeks, but there was no remorse in her face. Not real remorse, just fear. The kind of fear that shows itself when the consequences finally show up at the door. My son-in-law, on the other hand, wasn't even pretending anymore. His hands trembled not because he felt guilty, but because he realized his future depended on the paper he just signed. He had expected wealth, power, control. Instead, he was accepting a payout, like a man taking a severance package after committing a crime. The officers reviewed the signatures and stepped aside. My lawyer explained the conditions again. No future claims, no inheritance rights, no legal ties. The $5 million would be wired into a trust they could access only after relocating and signing a separate confidentiality agreement. If they violated any term, the deal would dissolve instantly and the criminal charges would pick back up. There was no loophole, no trick, no way back into my estate. It was final. My daughter looked at me then, really looked at me, not as her mother, not as the woman who raised her, but as the person standing between her and the life she wanted. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something heartfelt, something human, but nothing came out. Because the truth is, her heart wasn't breaking. It was calculating. She wasn't mourning the relationship. We had lost that long before the cabin. She was mourning the future she wanted, the money she thought she'd inherit, the life she imagined she'd live if I disappeared in those flames. Then something small but powerful happened. My son-in-law took the contract folder from the table and began flipping through it, page by page, as if he was still looking for a way out. His lips tightened, his jaw clenched. He looked like a man whose pride had been shattered in front of the one person he never wanted to disappoint, himself. Greed had driven him for years. Greed had turned him into someone who believed he deserved everything without earning anything, and now he was signing away the future he believed belonged to him. He slammed the folder shut and said, "Fine." That one word told me everything. There was no shame, no regret, no apology. He just wanted the money, whatever amount he could still get. My daughter, though, the moment she realized she truly had no claim to the rest of my fortune, something inside her broke, not in the way a heart breaks, but in the way a fantasy breaks. She covered her face with both hands, shaking her head slowly, not because she cared about losing her mother, but because she cared about losing billions she didn't even know existed. She wasn't crying for me. She was crying for the life she almost stole. I watched her carefully. Older women can read faces the way younger people read text messages. And what I saw wasn't sorrow. It was disappointment dripping with self-pity. She wasn't grieving the cabin. She wasn't grieving what almost happened. She was grieving the wealth she believed she was owed, simply because she shared my blood. My lawyer gave them the final document to sign, an agreement to leave the state within 30 days and sever all legal, financial, and inheritance ties with me. The money would only be released if they completed those steps. The amount shocked everyone in the room. $5 million, enough to quiet their desperation, but not enough to change their souls. My daughter hesitated this time. She stared at the paper so long the room went silent again. Part of her still expected me to soften, to take her hand, to beg her to stay, to offer her more. But I stayed quiet. Completely quiet. She finally signed, and the moment she did, her true nature came out like a flash of lightning. She didn't look at me with love. She didn't look at me with loss. She didn't look at me with regret. She looked at me with bitterness, sharp, angry bitterness, because the money she got wasn't the money she wanted. She had come for a fortune. She walked away with a deal that exposed the truth about her priorities. My son-in-law stood up first. He grabbed his jacket, nodded at the officers, and walked out of the room without even glancing at me. My daughter followed slowly, glancing over her shoulder once, not with longing, but with the wounded pride of someone who believed she deserved my entire life's work. As the door closed behind them, the officers exhaled, my lawyer packed up the files, and the room finally felt still. Not peaceful, just still. The kind of stillness that comes after a tornado tears through a town, leaving behind quiet streets and scattered debris. In the end, they didn't expose themselves. They revealed themselves. Their hands didn't shake because they nearly killed me. Their hands shook because greed lost. When the door closed behind them, it didn't slam. It didn't echo. It didn't shake the room. It just clicked shut. A soft, final sound that carried more weight than any argument, any betrayal, any broken relationship I had survived in my 70 years. My daughter and son-in-law walked out of my life not as family, not as loved ones, not as people I needed to forgive or chase. They walked out as strangers. Strangers with their own choices, their own consequences, and their own ghosts to live with. And for the first time in a long time, I felt my shoulders drop. I felt something leave my body. Not sadness, not anger. Something heavier, fear. Fear that had been sitting inside me like a stone for months. The police officers stepped outside. My lawyer shook my hand and told me I was strong, stronger than most people he had met. But strength didn't feel like the right word. I wasn't strong. I was tired, bone tired, heart tired. The kind of tired that only mothers understand. The kind that comes from loving a child so deeply that even when they hurt you, the pain sits in your body like an old injury that flares up during storms. I sank into the couch, breathing slowly, letting the silence settle around me. The next few days were quiet. Not peaceful, not yet, but quiet. My house finally felt like mine again. No more cameras hidden by my son-in-law. No more whispered conversations behind doors. No more footsteps I didn't trust. I changed the locks, reinforced the doors, and updated all my security systems. Practical steps for safety, but emotional steps too. Steps that said I was done being a target, done being watched, done being manipulated. I bought new blankets, new sheets, new kitchen towels, small things, but each one felt like replacing a layer of old pain. I opened windows and aired out the house. I cooked meals I loved instead of meals I made for others. I played music from my younger years, filling the rooms with songs that reminded me of the woman I was before life got complicated, and every small action stitched a piece of myself back together. I didn't take calls from extended family right away. Word traveled fast, of course. People always talk when scandal hits a family. My siblings called. My cousins reached out. My nieces sent messages saying they were sorry, even though they didn't know the full truth. But I didn't answer. I didn't owe anyone explanations or stories or emotional labor. My healing didn't need an audience. My healing needed stillness, space, and a little kindness. From myself, not from anyone else. The money my daughter signed away, I didn't rush to use it. I let it sit quietly where it always had, protected and untouched. But I did decide to make one change. I donated a portion anonymously to a shelter for older women, women who had been pushed out of their homes, who had been used by family, who had nowhere safe to go. Women like me, but with fewer resources. I didn't sign my name on the donation. I didn't want praise. I wanted impact. I wanted to give what I had once wished someone would give me, protection. Then, once my home felt like a safe place again, I started planning a small trip. Nothing extravagant, just a quiet getaway to a peaceful coastal town with calm beaches, thrift shops, and little cafes where grandmothers sip tea and watch the waves move. I packed light. I told no one where I was going. For the first time in years, I wanted peace without feeling guilty for wanting it. As I sat on that beach days later, watching the tide pull in and out, I began to understand something important. I had spent so much of my life giving, sacrificing, and hoping that love would be returned in the same shape I offered it. But love doesn't always come back in the same shape. Sometimes it comes back twisted. Sometimes it doesn't come back at all. And that is not a reflection of your worth. It is a reflection of theirs. My daughter made her choices, and I made mine. I chose to protect myself. I chose to walk away. I chose to keep living. I chose to let the part of me that believed family couldn't hurt you finally be put to rest. The world didn't end. The sky didn't fall. My heart didn't break into pieces I couldn't repair. Life kept moving, and so did I. At my age, peace isn't a luxury. It's the prize you earn after surviving everything life throws at you. And if I learned anything from this hellish chapter, it's this. Invisibility wasn't my weakness. It was how I survived my own family.